As Rhea and Jason entered into the beautified hall, it seemed like all eyes were on them. They had basically been assaulted by the paps on their way in, the flash of light momentarily blinding Rhea's vision. They threw several questions concerning Theo their way. It was the first time he was actually going out in public, and they were basically like wolves, hungry for information. "Is this your son? What is his name?" All those questions were what the paparazzi threw their way. Rhea just pushed Theo's head to her chest. She didn't want them to have a picture of her baby. Theo was something that was hers, well, hers and Jason's, but she didn't want them to have him. Jason shielding them alongside the bodyguards until they were inside the party. Rhea heaved a sigh as she entered the beautified hall, not even aware of the fact that all attention had turned to them. "A round of applause for my only son and his beautiful family," Jason's father said, as they entered into the room. She was still a bit dazed from the paparazzi, and so was Theo. It was clear that Eugene had been giving his speech when they entered, and as the spotlight shone on them, an applause rang through the crowd and Theo started crying. At the sound of Theo's scared tears, Jason looked at her and quietly led her out of the room. She could vaguely hear Eugene explain to the crowd, but her mind wasn't there. It couldn't be, especially when her son was screaming his voice out. "Don't worry, Theo, you will be fine. Mommy won't let any of those bad people get to you," she said, bouncing him on her shoulder when they got to an empty room in the hall. As Jason closed the door behind them, the sound was muffled and Theo began to quieten down. "I guess he was spooked. So many people and so much noise. We shouldn't have brought him here," Rhea noted as Theo began to doze off in sleep. She felt really terrible and stupid. How could she not know that she wasn't supposed to bring a baby to such a party? How did she not know that he would be spooked? "It's fine, Rhea. We are doing this for the first time. We will be fine. We will learn from our mistakes," Jason said quietly, and Rhea looked at him surprised. "When did you get so wise?" she asked him, and he just chuckled. "So now you will change Theo's next diaper?" Rhea asked half-jokingly. She wasn't sure she wanted Jason to maim her child. The horrified expression that appeared on Jason's face made her want to burst out in laughter. "I will try," he said, albeit reluctantly. It warmed her heart to think that he was actually willing to change, that he cared enough. By the time Theo had slept deeply, Jason left her alone and went back to the party, as one of the staff said his father needed to talk to him. He promised he would return in a bit, and he did. He came back with a member of the young girl, who he said was a member of the hotel staff. He explained that they had a daycare where children were kept. Rhea was reluctant to give the lady her baby. She really was. The young lady was a stranger, although she had a friendly face. But Jason convinced her, and Theo went without fussing. When Theo was gone, Rhea and Jason went back into the party to mingle, but her mind wasn't there. All she could think about was her baby and how he wasn't with her. She was introduced to several people that she couldn't remember their names. Her parents were even there, but she couldn't muster anything other than a fake smile. Jason could feel her discomfort as he rubbed comforting circles with his thumb into her palm. She was so worried that he would be hungry, or he would need his diaper changed, or he would be cranky. When she thought about it, she wondered how she would have been able to give her baby to a stranger as she had previously planned, and that would have been forever and not just for a few hours. Immediately the party was over, she dashed to the direction where the nursery was. She felt so stupid for feeling so scared. Theo was smiling heartily as he played with the red toy in front of him. He was seated on the lady's lap, with seemingly no care in the world. "I see you guys are having fun," Rhea said as she entered the nursery. More children were in the room, some coloring, some playing, all looking happy. "Mrs. White," the lady said as she stood up, propping Theo on her hip. "We are going home now," she said, and stretched her hands forward to carry Theo. She put him in her hands, and Rhea reveled in his baby scent. She missed her son. She carried him carefully as they went home. That night she cried for the mistakes she would have made and thanked God for not letting her go too far. Rhea was sure she loved her son with all her heart. It had been 4 months since the party, and Jason had finally learned to put on a diaper. He was actually becoming good with Theo. He could hold him without looking like he was about to puke, and Rhea could leave the both of them together without fear of coming back to a dead child. Theo was now 7 months old and was as active as ever. The past few months had been a whole new experience and 50 shades of stressful. He was now crawling up a storm, and that meant she couldn't even leave him for a moment. If she turned her back, then he would be gone. Eve had become Theo's new nanny as she started working again at the firm. She had lost her pregnancy weight, but her boobs were still bigger than their usual size, as she was still breastfeeding. She had missed the everyday work experience, and a lot had changed since she left. Seb had become the assistant CEO of the company and had made a lot of changes, but Rhea wasn't resentful, as she knew that it was his rightful place. She had even become closer and closer to him, helping him with his everyday work. Together they actually made a great team, and they were like fire together. She had taken less hours at work so as to have time with her baby. Jason had also begun to take less and less contracts, and so was around most of the time. He had come around having a son, as he loved to show him off to his friends. Sometimes Rory came around with Will, and they would have their own little play date. The two boys were so alike that Rhea knew that they were truly going to be best friends. Theo was growing up to look more and more like his father, with the brown eyes and cute dimpled smile. Rhea knew that her son was going to turn heads when he was older. He didn't cry at night like he used to anymore, and even though he did, it wasn't through the night. But that didn't make her less stressed out, as he was oh so active during the day. He had the affinity for putting everything in his mouth, and that kept her on her toes. He also loved to push things over, and nothing seemed to leave his fingers. He was the most curious child, and he always had her laughing. He loved the sound of jingling keys, and he loved his mummy very much. Rhea picked up the last of her things and hurried out of her office. She missed her baby. She had to stay back because of a few meetings, and it was already 5 p.m. She drove as fast as she could without breaching the speed limit as she went home. She sat frustrated in the traffic and was so glad when she finally saw the gates of her home. She threw her car keys to Raymond to help her park and rushed in with her heels. She was about to barge into the office when she saw the most beautiful sight. Her husband was sitting down on the floor, a whole load of colorful building blocks around him, with her son giggling and laughing with his father. They were both trying to build a castle, while Jason was building and Theo was just hitting the blocks on each other. Rhea felt tears wet her eyes as she watched the most beautiful scene. Never in her life did she think that the same Playboy that broke her heart, that told her to get rid of her child, that said he could never be a father, was sitting down and playing with their son. Miracles do happen. "Babe, you're back," Jason said, surprise lacing his tone as he noticed her standing by the door. Rhea wiped the stray tear that was drifting from her eyes and smiled as she approached her little family. "Yes," she said, still smiling, as Theo had noticed her and had started crawling towards her. He was muttering what sounded like "Mummy," and her heart just melted. "Did you miss Mummy?" she asked in her baby voice as she picked Theo up, littering kisses all over his face, and her baby started giggling, his small voice angelic to her ears. He was definitely a mummy's boy. "So no kisses for me?" Jason asked, pouting a little. He looked so much like Theo when he did that. "You are such a baby," she teased, propping Theo on her hip and squeezing his cheeks. Before she could tease him more, he planted a wet kiss on her lips. As she gasped in surprise, he took the opportunity to move his tongue through her lips. She moaned, feeling herself get wet. Those 3 months of celibacy for her and Jason were pure torture. When she was finally cleared by the doctor, her and Theo started going at it again like bunnies. She actually started taking birth control pills, because for as much as she loved Theo, she had no intentions of having a baby so soon. Jason wrapped his hand around her waist, pulling her closer to him, and she angled her head, deepening the kiss. They were getting more and more lost in their world, and it was Theo's frustrated cry that brought them back to earth. The poor baby was getting squashed. "Ugh!" Jason groaned as he reluctantly removed his lips from hers, muttering what sounded like "cock block" under his breath. Rhea was equally frustrated as she groaned when she bounced Theo on her hip. When he refused to stop crying, she said, "I think he is hungry. Let me get him some food." "Okay." Jason grumbled and she chuckled again. "Don't worry, babe, I will make it up to you," she reasoned. That seemed to light up his mood as a smile quickly appeared on his face. She walked, heels and all, to the kitchen with a crying Theo, and she told one of the live-in maids to help her out, since Eve went home every day. Theo was satisfied and quiet as Rhea gave him the bottle. He was actually quiet as she bathed him and put him in a fresh diaper, and like a good little baby, he dozed off even before she was done singing the lullaby. He was probably tired from all the activities of the day. Immediately she was sure that he was asleep. She rushed back to hers and Jason's room, hoping for a continuation of that morning, but Jason was already fast asleep when she got there. She grumbled under her breath as went into the bathroom and had her bath, cursing and mumbling throughout. She threw one of Jason's t-shirts on, not bothering about underwear, as she climbed into bed. She hadn't even gone into the land of sleep when Jason's hand latched on her waist, slowly going down the curve of her hip. She smiled lazily as she enjoyed his touch, moving closer to him and burying her face in his neck. His fingers made their way under her shirt, touching bare flesh. She could hear his gasp, and she muffled her own moan against the skin of his neck. His deft fingers made their way in between her tights, and she spread for him anything to make his passage easier. He hadn't even touched her and she knew she was soaking. As his finger made contact with her already wet sex, she gasped and bit into his neck. He ran a finger up her slit, making her shiver from the contact, and started flicking her already sensitive clit with his thumb as pushed 2 fingers into her. She moaned at the contact of his long fingers. She absolutely loved them. He started pushing his fingers in and out of her sex, and she couldn't help herself. She was moaning with abandon. She absolutely loved what he was doing to her. "Baby, I am so close," she said. She could feel her orgasm. She could basically feel it with the tip of her fingers. She could sow the vision with her eyes, at least until Jason stopped. As soon as she made the proclamation, he removed his fingers from her, leaving her so bare. She opened her eyes and was about to protest when she was what Jason was doing. He was freeing himself from his pants, and it was clear that she was about to be filled with something bigger than his fingers. Her sex tinged in anticipation. She let out a moan as Jason filled her with one thrust, hitting the right spot. "God, Jason, that felt so good," she moaned, and he gave her another hard thrust, efficiently shutting her up. She had no strength nor interest in words as she met his thrusts with hers, letting him fuck her into oblivion, making her see stars as she came violently alongside Jason. He didn't pull out and just stayed limp inside her as they both drifted to sleep. All in all, it was an exquisite night, one that she wouldn't forget soon. Rhea woke up as she slept with her husband. Her t-shirt which she hadn't taken of as they had sex the night before, was still bundled up on her stomach, and Jason's hand was under it and on her bare breast. He seemed to love it more than Theo did. She was snuggled up against him, and a particular hardwood was nestled between her butt cheeks. She had no idea what had woken her up, but she didn't feel like leaving the bed. It had been a long while since her and Jason had so much time to themselves. She was half expecting Theo to start screaming as per usual. But Theo didn't seem inclined to cry, and for that Rhea was grateful. Happy with the moment of respite, she drifted back to sleep. Rhea woke up for the second time that morning, in the loving embrace of her husband, feeling his warmth on her body. She shifted even closer to him, rubbing her bare bottom on his already hard self. She wanted him to wake up. Her prayers were answered as he grew even harder under her touch, and he flipped her on her back and climbed on top of her, caging her in his arms. "You look beautiful, babe," he said, his voice hoarse from sleep, and she flushed a little. He had positioned himself between her legs, and all that was remaining was for him to push it in. She almost started whining when he bent and started littering kisses on her jaw, over her neck, sucking on her collarbone, his hands under her shirt, flicking her, having her basically thrash her around with pure pleasure. He slowly eased himself inside her as sucked on her bare nipples. He had managed to discard the shirt. She felt so full. His thrusts had reached a steady rhythm, and she was meeting them with hers. She could feel the intensity of her orgasm as it was building and building, and when it came with violence as she sank her teeth into Jason's neck to prevent her cry. In the back of her mind, she still remembered that Theo was still asleep. Jason didn't seem to realize that as he came with a violent growl, spilling his hot seed inside her. As Jason shouted, a familiar cry rang from the adjoining room. Theo was awake. Rhea wrapped sheets around and rushed to the room, which was more than awkward since Jason's comb was leaking out of her core and sticking on her tights. No one had to tell her that she needed a long hard bath. Even as she carried a crying Theo from his crib, she could testify that 3 was a crowd. She was very grateful that Theo hadn't decided to cry when they were still going at it. The only thing his cry prevented was their cuddling, and she actually needed to get to work as she was late. She soothed Theo and then went on to take a long bath before dressing up hurriedly for work. When she was done, she met Jason feeding Theo breakfast. She had no idea what changed his mind, but she loved her new husband. "Aren't you going to work?" she asked Jason as she picked up an apple, and he shook his head. "I would have loved to stay in, but we have a meeting, and I am so late," she complained as she took a bite of the apple, picking up her bag and kissing both Jason and Theo goodbye, and rushed to the office. As she drove to the office, her heart was pounding rapidly in her chest. Since she resumed work, her father had been on her neck. It couldn't be more clear that he didn't want her to work. She took the elevator straight to her father's floor. Better to see him now than for him to call her later and claim that she was extremely late and she wasn't. The elevator dinged, and she could hear noise of argument from the direction of her father's office. It was the only office on the floor, and she could basically hear his words echoing on the walls. "How can you say he cheated me?" her father shouted to an unknown person. It was clear by his voice that he was pissed off royally. She inched towards the office, and by the sound of the voices, she knew that he was arguing with Seb. The words were loud and laced with anger, making Rhea wonder the cause of such a tense argument. She had absolutely no idea of what might have happened. She took a deep breath and entered into the office without knocking on the door, but by the way they were arguing, Rhea doubted they would hear if she actually knocked. As she walked in, she hoped that her brother and father did not eat her alive. "Rhea," her father said, surprised as he saw her standing in his office. Him and Seb stopped arguing as she entered the office. By her father's flittering gaze, she could tell that something was wrong. She was almost sure that she had something to do with their argument. "You are late," her father said to her as she regained his composure. She just rolled her eyes at him, knowing fully well that he was only saying that to distract her from the matter on ground. "What were the two of you arguing about?" Rhea asked suspiciously. Both her father and brother were fidgeting. Well, her brother was fidgeting and her father was trying to look like he was in power and all. "Nothing of your concern," her father said offhandedly and sat on his chair. Rhea just glared at her father, but he didn't even falter under her harsh gaze. She wanted to prod further, but she decided to keep her mouth shut. She would investigate later. "Why are you late?" he asked, and she almost groaned. He had been using it against her, as he didn't like her working. Her father would be the happiest man in the world if she became a full-time housewife. "Well, I had some family issues," she said vaguely. She was pretty sure that her father would be terribly mad if he found out the actual reason why she was late. "That is it," he exclaimed, banging his fist on the table dramatically. "If you are having family issues, then shouldn't be working in the first place." "Oh please Daddy, stop being so dramatic. Eve takes good care of Theo, and he always likes it when I am home. And besides, I love my job, and you know that." "But your baby is just 7 months old," her father said, his voice pleading. Rhea didn't understand why her father was so adamant on her not working when she was still nursing. "Theo is a big boy. In 5 months, he would be 1 year old, and I am very good at my job. Both of you were hopeless when I wasn't here. Seb can testify," she said, pointing her finger to Sebastian, who had been quiet throughout the entire exchange. Seb just raised his hands up in sign of surrender, as he didn't want to be part of the argument. "This argument is already getting old," her father said, as though he wasn't the one that brought the argument in the first place. "I have sent the pitch of the whale contract to you. Work on it," he continued offhandedly. The whale contract was one that he claimed he didn't want her to partake in, but he was giving her the full leverage to work on it. She was so excited that she didn't see something fishy there. "Thank you, Daddy," she said, giving him a big hug and returning to her office. For the rest of the day, she and her team poured their energy into making the pitch as marketable as possible, twisting and turning the words. She put so much time into it because she wanted to prove her father wrong. She was sure that he really loved her, but since she had the baby, he didn't want her to work anymore. By the time it was lunch, her team was groaning and complaining, and so she gave everyone a break. As her 5 team members left the office, she put on the black suit jacket that she had discarded as the meeting was getting intense, straightening it over her bright pink gown. She then made sure that her hair was still placed in a bun before she picked up her purse and left for lunch. She strolled out to the usual coffee shop that she had usually frequented for breakfast. It wasn't homey like the one that her and her friends loved, but it was practical and the food tasted nice. She sat down on her usual table and ordered a sandwich and a cup of tea. She actually hadn't been drinking coffee since the pregnancy spoiled that for her. She video called Eve, and she saw Theo crawling around and babbling his baby language through the phone. She smiled as she saw her very own son playing around with his toys. As she stepped into the office after her lunch break, she could tell something had happened. The air was tense and everyone seemed to be staring at her, though when she looked back at them, they avoided her gaze. She had an inkling why the air was so thick. She knew it had something to do with the argument Seb and her father had earlier in the morning. Quickening her steps, she marched up to her father's office. She needed to know what was wrong, and she had every intention of demanding answers. The elevator ride seemed to last forever, and when it finally dinged, she rushed out of the moving box. In all her life, Rhea had never seen her father angry. She heard from her brothers that he had been like a bull when he found out that Jason impregnated her, but she actually hadn't seen it. As she stood in front of her father's office for the very first time, she saw him angry. He looked like he could kill. Rhea immediately felt pity for the person who would be victim of her father's anger. Both Teddy and Seb were trying to restrain her father from throttling someone. Surprisingly, the person was none other than Rhea's father-in-law, Eugene. On seeing the situation, Rhea rushed into the office, trying to restrain her father from hurting the other man. "Daddy, what's wrong?" she asked her father. She had never seen him so angry, and she didn't understand why he would be so angry at Jason's father. They seemed all chummy when they planned her and Jason's impromptu wedding. Her father didn't even spare her a glance as he continued glaring at Eugene. "So you think you can just cheat me and get away with it? Well, think again, because the deal is over. You didn't just cheat me, but you brought my family into it. You brought my daughter into it. You and your rotten son should leave our lives and never return." At her father's vulgar words, Rhea put her hand over her mouth in surprise. She was shocked. She stumbled back and she sat on the chair, processing the entire matter. She didn't even know what to think. Eugene had been so nice and welcoming to her. He had been so good, and she couldn't picture him doing what her father had accused him of. He didn't strike her as cunning or anything in that aspect. If at all, it was Jason's mother that didn't sit well with her, not his father. She could vaguely hear the guards lead Eugene out of the office, but she was still lost in thoughts, still confused. She had no idea what to think. "I am so sorry, Rhea. I was wrong. I am so sorry for forcing you into a marriage with that bastard's son," her father said, bringing her out of her daydream. He was actually apologizing. Many months ago, she would have jumped up happily about this profession. She would have smiled at her father's words, happy that she would be free from Jason, but then she couldn't smile. She couldn't laugh. She couldn't even formulate words to say. She didn't know how she would respond to her father. She loved Jason, and there was nothing in the world that would make her leave him. But she felt so betrayed. She had no idea what his father did, but he knew it was wrong. "It's okay, Daddy," she finally said, forcing the words out her throat. "No, it's not okay, it's not. I basically sold my only daughter out to a family of wolves." Her father lamented again. He seemed so angry with himself, so much so that Rhea began to feel bad. "What did Jason's father do?" Rhea asked out of curiosity. "Well, the cunning bastard faked the contract, instead of it being an arrangement. He had been collecting while he left me with Just, and I didn't know. He connived with some other of my business partners, and they fooled us all of us." Rhea couldn't believe what she was hearing. She couldn't believe that Eugene was capable of such atrocities. She felt betrayed and disappointed. "I was suspicious and got a private investigator to look into the case. Turns out my hunch was right, and he was fooling me. I am going to sue him for everything he is worth." Her father continued. Rhea frowned as a thought passed through her mind. Was Jason on it too? She was confused. She wanted to believe that Jason knew nothing about it, that he was clueless of his father's plans. He hated his father after all. But a voice kept on nagging at her. What if he had connived with his father? She shrugged those thoughts from her mind. He loved her. He might have never said it, but she was sure he did. He said he wasn't ready for a husband. A nagging voice at the back of her mind reminded her, bringing more fear to her heart. She didn't know what to think. "Your marriage with his useless son is null and void. You don't have to stay married to that bastard anymore." The thought of not being married to Jason was so unpleasant that she didn't want to consider it. But what if I want to stay married to him?" she asked. She immediately regretted the question as she saw the looks on her father's and brother's faces. The bastard rejected your baby. He left you for months while you were pregnant, and you still want to stay married to him. Teddy shouted, and tears began to prick the sides of Rhea's eyes, threatening to drop. He is changing. He is trying his best. She defended him. She couldn't help but feel bad as her brothers bad-mouthed him. Bullshit, Teddy said. I am pretty sure if you give him divorce papers today, he will happily sign them. He is a bastard and nothing will change that. Every word that Teddy uttered broke her heart slowly and slowly. It was so much that her chest physically hurt. That's a lie. Jason is not like that, she defended. Sorry to break it to you, but he is like that. His father was here just a few moments ago, bragging on how he fooled us all, on how we would never win the case in court, on how his son was in on this the entire time. So big sis, Jason is like that, Seb said, and Rhea couldn't take it anymore. She dashed out of the office, her tears blinding her vision. She could vaguely hear her brother shouting her name, but she ignored them. She could hear her father tell them not to follow her. She couldn't be more glad. She ran down the stairs and she couldn't wait for the elevator and into her office. She needed a good cry. Jason posed yet again for the camera. His body was at the shoot, but his mind was far away. He was still daydreaming about the events that occurred earlier in the morning with his wife. He groaned as he remembered the expression on her face as she came. She looked so glorious. The last few months for them with the coming of the baby had been stressful, coupled with the fact that Rhea decided to resume work. Not that Jason didn't like her working, on the contrary, he loved that she had passion for something. The passion that she had for her job undeniably turned him on. But the job and Theo combined had taken a toll on their sex life. The last night coming up to that morning was wonderfully good. Can you do it better, like loosen your shoulders a bit, align yourself to the light? The annoying photographer said for the umpteenth time in his fake French accent. Jason growled under his breath. He fucking hated the bastard, but somehow he swallowed it all. The process of modeling had begun to get tiring over the years. The annoying paparazzi, basically being pushed into different positions. It didn't even seem like he had a choice anymore. It had begun to slowly lose its appeal. When he was younger, he loved the drama, the popularity, the beautiful ladies, and being important in general. But recently he enjoyed spending time with the little fucker, than actually standing and taking dramatic pictures, and letting models that are not Rhea run their hands along his body. He enjoyed watching his son, that had grown so fast, play with blocks and crawl around the place. He mightn't still be a good father, but at least he was trying. He was making efforts. As the photographer came in front of Jason and started making annoyed hand gestures, Jason decided that he needed a career change, one that wouldn't put his son and family in the spotlight, one that he would enjoy and not just want for fame, one that he could actually grow old with. I'm out, he said, picking up his jacket, not caring about the fake French photographer with a bone stick model. He could vaguely hear Isabella begging the photographer before she started running after him. What is wrong with you, Jason? She shouted, her voice loud and her face slightly red from anger. I know you think you are important, but you don't just walk out of a shoot that way. You can't just barge out of a shoot like that. That is Renee, one of the most influential photographers, and now he is angry. Isabella fumed. I don't care, Bella, I am done. He told her truthfully. He couldn't see himself doing that anymore. He wanted to sit with son and watch him grow. He wanted to continue loving his wife every new day. What? She screamed. They were already attracting attention as they were standing in the middle of the shoot. From the corner of his eye, he could see some people bring out phones. The photographer even seemed ready to take pictures. Jason didn't have any intentions of having his life being plastered on the internet, and so he dragged Isabella until they got to his room. At least he knew that he couldn't come inside there. "What the hell do you mean?" Isabella asked as she put her hands on her waist in akimbo. "I mean that you have to start looking for other clients to manage. I am done with modeling, for life," he said, holding her hard stare. She didn't seem surprised at his revelation. She just stared at him, looking straight into his eyes, as though she was trying to figure him out. "I knew that this would happen," she said after a while, and he was quite confused. "I knew that sooner or later you would get used to this seemingly perfect little family, that you would want to leave what you have worked for all these years, that it was only a matter of time before you started feeling that you loved them, and so you would do anything they asked because you feel love conquers all," she said again, and Jason looked at her. He really looked at her. It was getting clear that she wasn't even talking about him anymore. "What is going on between you and Ian?" he asked. Ian was her Irish fiancé. They had been together for years, and they had been engaged for up to 6 years, but they hadn't gotten married. Jason didn't know why, because Isabella would close up any time the subject was mentioned. "I am not talking about Ian. It's Rhea that told you to resign, isn't it? She couldn't handle being the wife of a celebrity, and so she told you to quit," Isabella asked, evading the question. "Rhea didn't tell me to quit. It was a decision that I made on my own. She doesn't even know that I have quit, and Rhea is willing to make sacrifices." "But that is not the point, Isabella, and you know it. All this is not about Rhea, and it has been a long time coming. This had something to do with Ian, and you refused to tell me about it," Jason said in the most serious voice. Isabella was his friend, and he was worried about her. "There is not going on," Isabella insisted. "Stop lying, Isabella." "I am not lying. There is nothing going on, and that is the problem. Nothing is going on," Isabella said, finally revealing something. "What is it, Bella? You know you can always talk to me," Jason said reassuringly. It had been so long since they had a heart-to-heart talk. Working for each other had put a dent on their personal relationship. "He broke the engagement about a year ago. It was around when I found out that Rhea was pregnant, the period when you got married," Isabella said, and Jason was flabbergasted. How on earth? She had been single for a whole year, and he didn't know about it. As he thought about it, he hadn't seen Ian since the period that he got married. The few times he had asked about the man, Isabella had shrugged off his question, saying he was busy and all that. He would have never guessed that they had broken up. What was his reason for breaking up the engagement? Jason asked. Ian had always been of the sensible sort, not one to make abrupt decisions, maybe even too sensible, and that was why they never got along. But he always respected the man. As he asked the question, Isabella began to tear up, her eyes watering. The sight shocked him, as Bella hardly ever cried. She might be moody and her demeanor down, but she never cried. At the sight of her tears, Jason moved to hug his friend. When let out her tears, but not too much, she dried her eyes and said, "We found out that I couldn't have children. We have been trying for a while, and since nothing had happened, we decided to go to the hospital. I don't even know the name of the sickness, but it affects my fertility, and because of it, I can't have children." As Isabella said the words, Jason was dumbfounded. It seemed like she was keeping such a hoard of secrets. She had been bearing all that pain on her own. "After the results came out, we had a big fight. I never really expected this to happen, as Ian had always been so rational. Even though I was broken and sad, I knew that my problems still had solutions. There was IVF, and if that didn't work, we could adopt." But Ian didn't seem to think this way, as immediately said he couldn't marry an incomplete woman. His words had broken me that day. A few weeks later, Rhea had appeared and she said she was pregnant for you. At that time the pain was still very raw, and I was so angry, so jealous. I had been trying to have a child for years, and suddenly Rhea comes even without trying. She is pregnant. That was why I was so angry and unsupportive of her then. She confessed, and Jason just pulled his friend once again into a big, "It's all right," he said to her, rubbing circles on her back. Isabella looked so broken that he was restraining himself from finding the fucker and beating the hell out of him. After what seemed like forever, she shrugged out of the hug and wiped her remaining tears. "I am so proud of you. You should go get your girl," she said, smiling, and Jason hugged as he rushed out his tent, with every intention of telling his family how much he loved them. He had gotten to his house and had picked up his son when his phone rang. He wanted to ignore it, but it continued ringing. The caller didn't seem inclined to stop. He handed Theo over to Eve, the nanny, as he picked up his father's cowl. "Jason, everything is over. We have been caught," his father said in a rush, and Jason frowned. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean the Robinsons have found us out. They are threatening to sue us," his father said, and Jason clenched his jaw out of anger. He couldn't believe that his father was dragging him into it. "You mean the Robinsons have found you out, and they are threatening to sue you? I have no part in your stupid plans to have more money. I can't fund your toys. You deserve to be sent to jail for trying to dupe the Robinsons." "Oh, and so after that, what next? You have always known about my plans. Do you actually think you will be able to leave without a scratch? If you must know, I have told the Robinsons of your involvement in the scheme. Consider your little family broken," his father continued. Jason felt anger rise in him at his father's words. He felt like breaking his phone or fucking smashing his fist on the wall, but he knew he had to remain calm. Truth was that he knew about his father's plan. Most of his life he owed to his father. He had taken care of him and his sister when their mother had left. Jason was grateful to his father, and his father knew that too well, so much so that he was using it to manipulate him. His father had always been greedy. He always wanted more money to fund his computer projects. The last project had gone down the drain as it hadn't been successful, but with millions of dollars lost, his father had become desperate as he started to look for funds from all areas to make money. That was why he suggested the marriage to Rhea's father, and of the profit wasn't enough for him. He needed more. Jason didn't know how much his father was collecting, but he knew that he was definitely cheating Rhea's father. He was still mulling over his thoughts when he heard Rhea call his name. His heart began to pound rapidly. It seemed like she already knew. She came inside the room wearing a pink figure, hugging down, and holding a black jacket on her hand. She was carrying a bag and holding a pack of papers. Her eyes were red and tear stains on her cheeks. He knew she was crying, and it was because of him. "Jason," she said in a cold voice, and he looked at her. "I am sorry," he said, hoping she would ask for an explanation, hoping he would be able to give her a reasonable one. Instead, she stretched the papers to him. "What are those?" Jason asked. He had a nagging feeling of what they were, but he didn't want to be right. Rhea walked slowly into her house, the one place she had called home for almost a year. She had become so accustomed to the house, and she had grown to love it. From the architecture to each and every memory she had made inside the house. Her eyes were already swollen and aching as a result of the tears she had shed. She felt so heartbroken and sad. On the drive home, she had begun to analyze everything, the wheels in her mind turning, and she was trying to figure out a reason why Jason did it. If Jason did it, she reasoned that he didn't even like his father, that he always seemed to abhor him. She didn't understand it then, but everything was becoming clearer and clearer to her. After she had wiped her tears, she began to see sense in her brother's words. She still had no idea whether Jason had connived with his father or not. She wasn't even sure that he loved her. But if she gave him the divorce papers and he agreed to sign them, that meant he didn't truly love her. The test wasn't an accurate one, but it was the only one she knew. She couldn't just walk up to him and ask him if he truly loved her. It was with that mind that she asked her father's lawyer to prepare divorce papers. It actually turned out that her father had them prepared in the case of eventuality, and so she took them before she started going home. As she entered the house, she went straight to the living room, where she saw Jason's back as he held his phone in his hand. "Jason," she said. Her heart was beating rapidly against her rib cage, and she felt so tired. "I am sorry," he said, and her heart broke into a million pieces. Why? She wanted to scream, she wanted to ask, and she wanted to plead. She didn't do all that. Instead, she just stretched the divorce papers in his face. "What are those?" Jason asked. He looked very confused, as though he didn't know that it would eventually come to this. "These are divorce papers," she said. "What do you mean?" he asked. It was clear by his expression that he was confused. "Were you aware that your father was duping mine?" she asked, giving him the benefit of doubt. The look of guilt that appeared on his face gave her the answer that she was looking for. Her heart ached at the betrayal. She felt so hurt and broken. To think that she had actually defended him, and yet he basically used her. It took all of her willpower for her not to burst into tears. She remembered everything, and she had never felt so played, so betrayed, so used. All of his words now seemed like lies. If he could lie to her about his father, then he could have lied about everything else. There was absolutely no way she could fully trust him, not after that. Although her chest was aching and tears were threatening to burst out of her throat, she managed to maintain a strong resolve. She looked at him hard and long as she said, "The marriage is now null and void. The prenup said that if one of the partners of the deal is found wanting, then the marriage is over. We are officially divorced." Her heart was pounding rapidly in her chest as she said those words, and every bone in her body was screaming no. As she said those words, Jason looked like he was in pain, but she couldn't trust his looks. He had looked like he loved her, but he clearly didn't. He might look like he was sorry, but there was a high possibility that he wasn't. "No," he said, shaking his head. "I won't sign those papers," he said. Rhea didn't know why his words brought some unexplainable joy to her. He had hurt her, but it felt so good that he wouldn't leave here. "Why?" she asked. "We can't get a divorce, Rhea. We have a child together." That was not the answer Rhea was expecting. It wasn't the one she wanted, and so she frowned. She was expecting him to tell her that he loved her, but no such words came out of his mouth. "That is not a reason to stay together, Jason. There are many couples who have children and are co-parenting, and besides, didn't you say you weren't ready to become a father?" she asked. She knew it was a low blow, but she asked anyway. "I don't want a divorce," he said, his voice showing finality. She was secretly happy, but his reasons unnerved her. It annoyed her that he didn't love her, that he expected her to stay with him in spite of it all. "What makes you think I will stay with you, after all you and your father have done to my family?" she asked, and Jason's expression considerably softened. "Look, Rhea, it's not like that. You don't know the entire story," he said, but by then Rhea was already angry. She wasn't inclined to listen anymore. "I don't care. I am not going to stay in this marriage, and the best option you have is signing those divorce papers," she said, and walked out of the living room. "I can't wrap my head around the thought that Jason did all that," Rory said to Rhea from the other end of the line. Rhea was lying on her own bed, as she had moved from the room that she shared with Jason. Theo was sleeping by her side, and she frowned as telling Rory all about everything. His own father confirmed it. Jason himself affirmed that he knew. She said to her friend, though by her voice she knew that her friend didn't believe. But even though it is true, is the best option to leave him. I think you should at least try to work it out. Rory said, and Rhea from as angry. Why on earth should she try and work out with someone that didn't even love her? Someone that didn't even want a family? Someone that lied to her? I can't do that, Rory. I can't put myself through so much unnecessary pain. Rhea said. To paw through so much pain was something she didn't even want to consider. Any decision you make is for yourself and your child. Please do reconsider. Rory said, and Rhea shook her head. She wasn't sure she could do all of that. I just want to be happy, Rory. He doesn't even love me, she confessed. How do you know that, Rhea? Jason does love you. I see the way he looks at you, Rory assured, and Rhea shook her head, even though she knew that her friend couldn't see her. If he loved me, he would say it, she said. Sometimes it is not by words, but by actions. I just want to start over, pursue my dreams, and be a good mother to Theo, nothing less, she said, even though she knew deep down that she was just lying to herself. She wanted his love, she craved it even, but it seemed she wasn't going to get what she wanted the most. She was still lying on her bed when she heard a knock on the door. She stood up and opened the door. She was surprised to see Jason behind the door. We need to talk, he said. We need to talk, Jason said in a serious voice as he stood by her door. About what? She asked rudely. We should come out so we don't wake Theo, he said, and Rhea came out of the room, closing the door carefully behind herself. So what do you want to talk about? She asked again, and Jason looked so resigned that she felt pity for him, but the pity quickly dissolved into anger when she remembered what he did to her. The divorce, is it really what you want? He asked, and she was shocked. She hadn't expected him to ask that. She didn't really know what to think about the question. She wanted the divorce. At least that was what she thought she wanted, and so she gave him a stiff nod. Jason seemed disappointed by her answer as he swallowed. Well, if it is what you want, I will grant you your wish, he said, his voice sounding low and defeated. Rhea would be a big liar if she claimed that she wasn't hurt, that his words didn't break her into tiny pieces. But this was what you wanted, she reminded herself. She had basically threatened him to give her the divorce. She had even told Rory that there was no way she would stay with him. She had said she wanted to be alone, that she wanted to start anew. Then why did it hurt so much? She made her decision because she knew that he didn't love her, but she was even beginning to doubt herself. She wanted to shout and scream. She wanted to tell him that she didn't want a divorce anymore. She wanted to force him to love her, but she knew it wasn't possible, and so she just nodded her head like a dummy again. So where are the papers? He asked. Things were so awkward between them as they agreed to get a divorce. When they first met about 2 years ago, she wouldn't have guessed that all those things would have happened to them. She wouldn't have guessed they would have a child together, that they would get married, that for a while they would be like a family. She wouldn't have guessed that it would all come down to them getting divorced. She was disappointed by the actions of Jason's father and how it had brought them so much pain. I will go get them, Rhea said as she entered into her room. It wasn't easy as she took the papers that joined her and Jason as man and wife and she gave them to him. He sat on the chair in front of her room and signed the papers that made them not be joined. It was just a signature, but it felt like a ton of bricks was thrown on her. She kept convincing herself that she was doing the right thing, that she was making the decision for her son, that she needed that signature, but it wasn't easy. When Jason signed the papers, he handed them over to her, and just like that it was done. The divorce was finalized, it was over. As Jason signed the papers, he left her and she broke down. As she sat on the floor, she heard the purr of an engine and she knew that Jason was leaving. She had no idea how she would take care of her child on her own, though it seemed Jason wasn't doing anything. But she couldn't imagine her child growing up without a father. A memory of Jason playing building blocks with Theo came to her mind, and she choked on a cry. She had no idea what she was going to do, but she felt physically torn apart. It took her a while to raise herself up and gather strength to start packing up her things. She moved all her things into boxes and called Raymond and the other staff to help her haul it into her car. She was carrying so much that it didn't fit, and her car actually looked swollen. The entire house felt as though a black cloth was put in it, dampening everyone's mood. Everyone was frowning. No one was smiling, not even Rhea, who claimed to want a divorce. The staff were looking at her with judging eyes. She knew that it was because they had heard their argument a day before. To top that, as Theo woke up from his nap, he started crying, and not just normal cries. He started screaming. When she tried to calm him, he began to flail his arms and legs around. Nothing seemed to calm him down, even when she sang his favorite lullaby and swung him around. He cried so much that his temperature began to rise, and Rhea was so scared. He hadn't even cried that way when he was teething. Rhea made her way back to her parents' mansion with a crying Theo in her arms. By the time they got the house, Theo had already cried himself to sleep. Her father and brothers were happy to see her. They were even more happy to hear that divorced Jason. Though her mother was happy to see her, she wasn't happy about the divorce. She claimed that it happened too fast, and they didn't even try to resolve the issue. She didn't support Jason's father's ways, but she had always thought that marriage was sacred. That night Rhea slept in her old bedroom, the one that didn't seem like hers anymore. She dreamt and fantasized of what would have happened if Jason's father didn't try and dupe hers. If her husband truly loved her, Age slept and dreamt of a happy ever after. Shit. I can't believe you are actually getting a divorce. Alex, Jason's best friend, said. No, Alex, it's not that I am getting divorced. I am already a divorced man. I am free as a bird. Jason shouted inside the bar, his thoughts already muddled by the amount of alcohol he had consumed. I don't know, dude. What about you, kid? Alex asked. The little fucker. He fucking cries too much, always screaming about something. I don't need him. I don't need her. He professed before downing another shot of whiskey. It's just that I am used to the fucker now, but I won't miss him. They could disappear from the face of the earth, as if I care. Jason scoffed again. But you know, she didn't let me explain. She didn't want to hear my side of the story, but I love her, I swear I do, but I don't need them. He slurred again, contradicting himself. Alex scratched his head. He had no idea what to do with his drunk friend. Nate was home as his son Will was teething. He knew very well that his friend loved his wife, and that he actually wanted her to stay, but he was trying to deceive himself. He was trying to convince himself that he didn't need them. Alex knew that it was Jason's pride talking, and that he would eventually figure out that he needed them. Alex only hoped that by then it wouldn't be too late. And I even quit my job. I have no idea what I am doing in my life. Jason slurred again. It seemed drunk Jason had become a reflective thinker. I quit as it didn't seem like the direction I was heading to know. But now I don't know where I belong anymore. It seemed to Alex that the alcohol had begun to wear off as he didn't take more shots. It was not the alcohol talking but Jason. I think you should fight for Rhea. Don't give up so easily. Alex advised his friend. He wasn't sure he was qualified to be giving such advice, as he had messed up the only serious relationship he had been in, but he didn't want Jason to lose his family. How on earth do you fight for someone that doesn't want you, someone that doesn't wish to be fought for? Jason asked. The look of pure pain on his face told Alex that any drop of alcohol on him had purely been wiped off. Rhea wants you. Women are like that sometimes. Maybe she is playing hard to get off something. Alex tried to reason and Jason just glared at him. I am not going to force myself on someone that doesn't even want me, he said. Alex knew that it was Jason's pride talking. He also knew that nothing he was going to say would change Jason's mind, and so he just shrugged. His friend was way too stubborn. I told you he was scum. I was so sure that immediately you gave him the divorce papers that he would sign them. Teddy droned on again, and Rhea rolled her eyes. Ever since she came back to her parents' house, everyone had grown 3 times more annoying. She had never been told "I told you" so many times in a more non-discreet way. Teddy had granted upon himself the gift of a psychic, as he was actually correct that Jason would sign the papers. Her mother was angry with her and ignoring her. Her father was busy trying to sue Jason and his father, as the evidence they had wasn't enough. Seb was helping their father out, and Brian and Max were back in school. The only comfort Rhea had was her son, and also the fact that Eve was there. Jason had allowed her to come stay with her. Rhea had later found out that Theo was sprouting some milk teeth, apart from the 8 he had in front. She was actually scared, because he was growing teeth much earlier than some other children, but the doctor assured her that it was fine, as some children grow teeth before others. The molars he was growing were making the very cranky, adding him to the number of people annoying Rhea. Rory was also mad at her, though her friend didn't say it out loud. Rhea knew that Rory was disappointed. She didn't fight for her marriage. Will was also teething, and that made them both busy, barely able to talk to each other, though sometimes Rory would come with her baby and they would have a playdate of sorts. Even as children, both Will and Theo loved to play together, and they seemed to understand each other's presence. She had stayed with her parents for approximately 2 months, and Theo was 10 months old. He had grown out the teeth and was now walking while holding on to something, though he could stand without support. When he would try to move one leg, he would look at her and smile, and Rhea would see Jason in her son. "Are you even listening to me?" Teddy asked, and Rhea realized that she had zoned out. She didn't even hear what he had been saying. "No," she said simply. She didn't even have the strength to lie. "Well, I said that Dad has finally found the evidence to put Jason's father in jail for a very long time. The trial is in 2 days." Teddy said, and fear washed over her. It was as though a bucket of ice had been poured over her. During the past 2 months, she had prayed and hoped that no evidence would be found. She didn't think she would be able to take it if Jason went to prison. For the past 2 months, she had been wishing that Jason would come and apologize, and that they would become a family again, but each day passed without anything of that sort happening. Rory had told her that her ex-husband was heartbroken and moping, but since he didn't even tell her, she didn't know what to think of his moping. She had tried to convince herself that she had fallen out of love for him, but the thought of him going to jail made her feel like vomiting. Can't Dad just drop the charges? He wouldn't get his money back if they went to jail. Rhea tried to reason, as that was what she had been doing ever since. Her words seemed to anger Teddy, as his demeanor quickly changed. "You are still defending that bastard, after all he has done to you. He doesn't love you, Rhea, get that into your head," Teddy shouted, and Rhea felt tears prick at the sides of her eyes. Before she could even open her mouth to answer him, he left the room in a fit of anger. It was with that pain and anger that she decided she couldn't live in that house. Not anymore. As she picked up her phone and called Richard, she had every intention of accepting his offer.